Welcome to yet another video in the GitHub Actions full course series. So far we have covered a great deal about GitHub Actions. We started with episode 1, an overview, and we talked about the workflow syntax. In episode 2, I showed you how you can achieve continuous integration with GitHub Actions. Episode 3, we talked about continuous deployment and how you can set up multiple environments and release and deploy to each one of them. In episode 4, we talked about how you can manage your infrastructure on AWS with Terraform as well as GitHub Actions. And I have published 3 videos that were released on the GitHub YouTube channel where I talked about how you can use the Action Runner controller to manage and scale GitHub Actions in your enterprise using self-hosted runners if GitHub hosted runners are not an option for you. And in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how you can create your own custom action and release it to the marketplace. I'm going to be doing this using both JavaScript as well as Docker action for, wider purpose programming languages. Stay tuned. We're going to get going right after the introduction. I hope you liked that new introduction. It's part of a little bit of a rebranding for 2022. And without talking too much about that, let us jump to the demo and screen sharing mode. All right, so what are we going to be building today? We're going to be building a small action that we can incorporate in our workflow. And what this action will do is whenever we create a pull request like this one, for example, it's going to come and create a comment on the pull request saying that this pull request comes with the following changes, like 5 changes, 5 additions, 0 deletions. It's going to run a git diff on and pick up the changes that are included in this PR, like the files that have been changed. And in addition to that, it's going to also assign labels based on the file extensions that it has been identified as part of the pull request. So if you go to the file changes over here, you will see that we have a readme.md file. And then it's gonna basically label the the PR with Markdown, for example. And then it's gonna state in the comment what has changed. This is what we're gonna be building. It's a very simple action. So where are we gonna start from? The GitHub Actions team have been generous enough to create templates for us that we can immediately use. And you can go to the action/javascript-action repository on github.com, and you will find basically this repo that we can start immediately using. Now, before we dig into the code and before we set it up and start playing with it, let us describe a little bit what's the folder structure and the project structure over here. So one of the most important pieces of any action is that the code for the action needs to live inside the repository. That's number one. The second part is there's an action.yaml file. This action.yaml file is basically where we define the interface of our action. If we go into the code, you will see here this is where we define the name of the action, the description, and the inputs. What are the inputs that this action takes, and the outputs that it generates, if there are any outputs. And then we define what is the runtime that we're going to be using, whether Node for JavaScript or Docker, as I'm going to show you in the second part of this video. And then we're going to specify which file is the entry point for this action. So which file is going to be executed for this action to actually run. When a workflow is triggered, the action.yaml file is parsed, and then the action is pulled from the source, wherever that action might live, and then the entry point is called, basically. Now, where is the entry point for this action? It's in this dist or distribution folder. And inside this distribution folder, you will see multiple files. We're probably not going to use all of those, but I'm just going to explain the index.js. Over here, the index.js is probably going to be a compilation. It looks a bit weird over here, but just because this is a packed file, it's basically a compilation of the action source code, what the action is supposed to do, plus all the source code of all the modules, the node modules, or the dependencies that this action requires to run. Why do we pack this file this way? Well, because first of all, we don't want to run npm install whenever we want this action to run, right? And second of all, we want to avoid pushing the node modules folder because this is going to make the size of our action much bigger. And why is it important to keep the size of the repository small? Well, because every time you call a custom action, you are basically cloning this repository. The GitHub Actions in the background basically clones the repository inside the runner. right? The runner that basically runs our workflow or runs our job, to be more specific, it's gonna clone this action, and it's gonna, if the size of the repository is big, then it's gonna take much more time, and the overall execution time of the job is gonna be much longer. So we wanna make sure that our action is as small as possible. We don't really push a lot of garbage into the repository, or let's say not garbage, but like stuff that is not really necessary. That's why we need to pack the action in a distribution file, and maybe even if we can compress it, that'll be even better, right? And of course, there's the index.js file over here. This is gonna contain the core or the logic of our action. Obviously, you are free to make the folder structure and the project structure more complex, depending on your requirements. I have even written a blog post about how you can leverage the command pattern, for example, when you are trying to create more complicated actions, like when you want your action to do some custom reporting and it needs to do a bunch of stuff, how you can leverage that design pattern to create more complex action. But for now, if your action is simple, like the one that we're going to be building right now, one file, which is the index.js, should be more than sufficient for your purposes. Of course, we have the package.json. This is where we define the metadata for our node package, which is the action itself, where we define the version, the name, description, and the scripts that we want. These are nice because they are predefined for us. So the linting can already happen. The prepare, which is the building stage, plus preparing the index.js file for distribution, and managing the licenses for compiling the license.txt file, basically for if we use some external dependencies, they have licenses, right? And we want to make sure that we carry these over to our GitHub action, especially if we are planning on publishing it. Here we are using Jest or Jest, whatever you want to call it, for testing as our testing framework. And then the all command is basically the one that does the linting, the building, as well as running the tests for our action. Here is where we define some extra metadata, and yeah, you probably should know all of this stuff already. A couple of more things in this repository that you should be aware of. In this template, first of all, we have the workflows folder, and the Actions team has provided us with two workflows. The first workflow is our testing workflow. This is gonna allow us to test our action. Once we build it, we wanna run some tests and we wanna see how it behaves, right? So this test runs on pull requests and on pushes to the main and release branches. We might wanna do some tweaks to this because it depends on what we're trying to build. We might not want to test based on pushes. We might want to test only on pull requests, for example, because of the nature of what we're going to be building right now. It's all up to you. If you don't know what I'm talking about here, obviously go back to the first video and you will understand the workflow syntax and how you can define your workflow files. Then inside the jobs, we have the npm CI and npm test steps. This is the first job. They are calling this the unit tests. We might skip this because I'm not planning on writing unit tests for this action. Feel free to do so yourself. And then the second step is basically testing the action runtime. The second job. And then it has, it's basically using the local action. So it's not really fetching the action from another repository. It's just using the current folder because it contains the action itself and the logic. This is the first file. The second workflow that is provided is the check distribution.yaml. And this one is pretty cool because more often than not, when we have a step that is called npm build or npm prepare, or whenever we want to compile this distribution index.js file, right? Oftentimes we modify the original index.js, but we forget to build. And this is nice because this workflow triggers whenever we push to our repository, and what it will do is it has a step that is called check distribution, a job again, which has multiple steps. And inside this check distribution job, it will basically run this one, which will compare the actual distribution folder and the content of it, and it will run a git diff on those. And if it identifies changes that are not committed, it's going to complain and it's going to fail basically with an exit one, which is going to basically fail our workflow with an error. And then this is how we know that we have pushed changes to our action, but we really forgot to build the index.js file inside our distribution folder, which means that these changes will not be picked up the next time or whenever this action is called, unless we do this build, right? So this is a really cool test workflow or a gate that will prevent us from, skipping building the changes and pushing them properly. And this is it. This is all I wanted to talk about in terms of folder structure. Now, if we want to start building our own custom action, all we have to do is to come here, click on this button, use template, and it will ask us where do we want to put this repository. Obviously, I'm going to put it under my own personal account, and I'm going to call this one, I don't know, what are we going to call it? PR comment. Yeah, PR comment should be okay. And we're going to provide a description. We're going to say comments on a PR, the changes. Yeah, the changes should be fine. We're going to make it public. Of course, you are able to make it private. However, you should be aware that the consumption of private actions has only been recently published. And I'm not totally sure you are able to consume private actions from a personal profile, but I'm totally sure that you can consume actions from an internal repository in an organization. That's why we're going to make our action public. It doesn't really contain anything secret or intellectual property that we don't want to make available to the entire world. So we're going to make this action open source, and we are going to create. I'm not going to copy all the branches. I think main is just enough, and I'm going to create the repository from template. And as you can see here, I have created, the repository is currently being created under my own account, and it's called PR comment as we stated. And you will see here that all of the files have been moved over, and now we are able to come in, edit this template, well, clone this template first, and then edit it and push it. And then we can add our custom code and try it out in some tests. Cool. Let's move to our trusted editor and let us clone this repository. And we can do that with the GHCLI repo clone. And then we can call it link-pr-comment. And we have the template cloned to our local folder. And I'm going to go to PR comment. And you can see here I have all the files. That's great. And then I am on the branch main, and this is version 1.0. That's all fine and fantastic. Let us open the folder, and I think it's called PR comment. Let us go into this folder, and you can see here I am running my development inside a container. I am going to be making a video about this down the line. I'm going to be showing you how you can do development work inside dev containers and how you can leverage the Remote Explorer extension in VS Code to stop polluting your host whenever you want to do some custom development work, and you can do all of this stuff inside a container, which is really awesome. And you can also carry over this work so that you can use GitHub Code Spaces, but that's for another time. Let us start by first of all deleting the files that we're not going to need. So there's the wait.js file, bye-bye, and then the index.test. We're not going to write unit tests, as I mentioned. That's just going to go. Code owners, I'm not sure I want this file as well over here. I'm going to remove it because this is going to be a public repo. License, I'm MIT. We need to change this to our own. So we're going to call this Radio, whatever. You can change it to your own name. It's an MIT license, so it pretty much tells anyone to do whatever, that they can do whatever they want over here. The package.json, we're going to rename this one to, what did we call it? PR comment. And this is version 1, that's fine. Adds PR changes as a comment. That's what we're going to be using it as a description. Main is index.js, that's fine, we can keep it. And then we need to change this URL to our repositories URL. So let us do that over here. Need to change this section. And we can leave the .git as is. Keywords, GitHub Action, JavaScript. We can add here pull request, for example, comment, metadata, whatever you feel makes sense. Author, you can add your own. I'm gonna add my handle. Oops, forgot to double quotes. And then, of course, make sure you update all the URLs. Let's do that. Let us actually do the following. Let's update all of those. Command Shift A, I selected all of them. And dependencies, we're just going to use the core. I'm going to explain what these libraries are in a bit. They will basically help us pull the inputs from the workflow and push outputs if necessary, as well as push debugging messages if needed to the workflows. NCC, of course, ESLint and Jest. I don't think we're going to be using Jest, so I'm going to remove it from the list. ESLint is cool because it's going to help us do some linting and check our coding style. That's fantastic. And after updating the package.json file, let me grab my terminal and make sure that I am inside the correct folder. Before we run npm install, let us actually check the version of Node running on this container, and it's version 10. That's really, really old. We can use nvm to install version 16, and let us actually do that. It's now installing version 16.14, which is cool. Let us actually check if that has been updated. And there we go. We are now running version 16, which is good. Now we can run npm install, and we can install all the necessary dependencies for our project. And this, as you will see here, it will create the node modules folder for us, and it will have all the libraries that are required for us to build our action. Now we can start by defining the interface for our action before we start building or adding the necessary code, right? So let us do that by opening the action.yaml file. And first of all, we're going to rename this action. We called it PR comment. And let's have the same description as our package.json file. So let's copy this from here and add this here. Now, as inputs, what do we need? First of all, we need the owner of the repository. We're going to add the comments on its PR, right? So the owner could be either a user or a organization, user or org, right? And then this is a required field. So we're gonna make sure that it's always inputted. Otherwise, the action will fail. And then the repo, which is the repository name, we can fetch all of these from the context of our workflow. So this is not necessarily manual information that the user has to input. All of these are available in the context, but we don't want to pull from the context directly. We want, the users to be able to specify and maybe even change these values if they want to. That's the purpose of the interface. We don't want to, we don't want to make things too abstract, or we don't want this action to be a black box. We want to clearly define what inputs it takes, and if it generates any outputs. It doesn't in this case, but yeah. The token in this field is for the GitHub token that we're going to be using. Why? Because we need this token to be available because we want to write and create a comment. We want to use the APIs, right? And for us to be able to use the APIs from this action to, call the REST API, we need a token that is authorized for write access to specifically this repository, right? And this is also required. So all of the fields are obviously all required. I'm going to remove the outputs because there's nothing that is going to be outputted here. I'm going to change the runtime to Node version 16. And I'm going to keep the main or the entry point to be our index.js file inside the distribution folder. Awesome. Now that we have defined the interface, let us actually commit some of these changes because, yeah, I think it's time for us to do a quick commit. Let me do a quick check here on GitLens. Everything looks good. So let's add all of the files. Let's stage them. And let us call this one add preliminary cleanup and defined interface. That should be good enough. We're not going to push it yet because we are still going to make changes. Now, next step we're going to be doing after modifying our action.yaml file is to have a look at our index.js. First things first, we need to pull or import the actions core library. And this will allow us to fetch the inputs from the workflow and store them in variables so that we can utilize them internally. This will also allow us, as I mentioned, to output error logs and whatnot. The second thing I'm going to be using is the action/GitHub, and this is the library that's going to allow us to call the REST APIs and even the GraphQL APIs. You will notice here that I have not declared this as a dependency, so let us actually do that in the package.json file. Let's do this here, or we can do it, actually, let me show you another way. So either you can add it here like this and then specify a version, or we can open our terminal and we can say npm install action/github save. And what this will do is it will pull this this module, and it will also append it to our package.json file. You can see here the packages have been added. We're good to go. Do a quick verification on that. Yes, you can see it here, version 5 and above. That's great. And now we can actually call it or require it from our main method. Now, let's start with the main function, which is called run. That's fine. And we are making it an async function. That's great, because we don't want to run it in sync. That's totally okay. Why? Because we are making calls to REST APIs and we don't know when these will finish. So it will be good for us to use the async await for the purposes of this method. Now, what are we going to start with? First, we are going to go and fetch the inputs, right? So we're going to, first of all, get the inputs and store them in variables. You will see here that I'm not really using any fancy JavaScript stuff. I'm just going to keep it very basic. I know that these can be used and in so many different ways. We can completely unpack, the inputs, object, and so on and so forth. I'm just going to keep it basic here so that everyone, even people without JavaScript experience, can understand what's happening. I don't really like the syntactic little sugar and all of that fancy stuff, right? So first of all, we're going to pull the owner, and then let's replicate this 4 times. And then we're going to pull the repo, right? And let's change it over here as well, because I'm going to call the variables the same name as I have defined them in my action.yaml file, because I don't want to really think hard. And it's also nice whenever I want to trace changes, I can just immediately spot them, right? Now that I have stored the inputs as variables, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize Octokit, which is the library, the JavaScript library that will allow us to call the REST APIs. So I'm going to call this one constant Octokit, and then I can say GitHub, which is we imported right here, get Octokit, which is a sort of it applies the factory pattern to provide us with an instance of a factory or singleton. I'm not really sure. We need to go to the code. But anyway, it applies a pattern where it fetches an instance, or it creates an instance of the Octokit library for us. And then what it does is it passes the token, which is the GitHub token, or you could replace it with a personal access token, or even a token coming from a GitHub app. Whatever your choice is and whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter. So we pass the token because this is what's going to be used for authentication purposes. Next, what we want to do is we want to fetch the list of the files that were changed in the pull request. And we can do that by calling the GitHub's REST API for listing the files in a pull request. How do you know what to call and the functions that are available for you to use? Well, it's very simple. You can go to the Octokit. Let me go there. GitHub Octokit documentation. I'm just Googling it. And the first result obviously is the one to go to. All right, and this is a pretty cool documentation that contains pretty much anything you want. The API we're gonna be calling is this one. So list files. Let's search for it. Perfect. This is the one. List pull request files. And the response includes a maximum of 3,000 files. The paginated response returns 30 files per page by default. That's fine. I don't really expect us to really, handle pagination in this call. Of course, it's recommended for you to handle pagination. And the Octokit library provides nice helper functions to manage pagination, where it will just, jump throughout all the pages until it gets to the last result. This is really cool. If you have a lot of results coming in, or if you expect a lot of results coming in from the pull request. For now, I'm assuming that my pull requests are small and they don't really require a lot of pagination. You can see here that this method requires the owner, the repo, and the pull request number to be provided. That's why we asked for those in the input of our action or in the interface of our action. And this is an example of how we could utilize this method. So let's do that in our JavaScript over here. We're gonna create a constant changed files, right? What is this? I'm gonna explain it in a little bit. And we're gonna call await octokit.rest.pulls.list files, right? And then we're gonna provide the parameters, owner, repo, and pool number, because the variable here is changed or the object key is different. And we're gonna specify the pull request number, and we're gonna close it with a comma. Now, what is happening here? This method will return an object, a JSON object, basically. The JSON object will have 3 keys, I think, 2 or 3. One of them is the status, which is the status of the HTTP response, right? If it's 200 and whatnot. And then one of the other keys that is provided is called data. And data is going to be basically the payload that is returned from the API. And this is what we care about. So here we are basically saying, I want you to store the payload from this response inside this constant. And this is what we're going to be using later on. Now, let us figure out what changed now, right? So we have the data that comes from the list files API. Now we want to see what has changed in this data. So the way we're going to be doing that is by first defining, I'm not sure, why do I even keep those? Let me just remove those. We don't really need them. Let me see. So yeah, I don't care about this. I don't care about this. The debug, yeah, I'm going to show you how to use this in a bit. Core info, okay, I'm going to show you as well these as well. That's fine. The output, we're not setting any output. Let us keep the catch error. That's okay. Now, let us define a variable called diff data. Why let? Because we want to modify it later on. We're going to, first of all, specify the first item. Additions 0, we start with 0. Deletions 0, this is going to be the body of the comment, right? And then changes 0. We're going to start with that, and then we are going to start calculating, the additions, the deletions, and the changes from the response of this API. How do we do that? We call this variable changed files, right? So we're going to call our diff data, and then we're going to make we're going to use the reduce function on the changed data, right? Because what we want to do is basically go and loop over all the files, and then we want to sum the additions, sum the deletions, and sum the changes. The reduce method is really, really good for this. It's a function that accepts up to 4 arguments. The reduce method calls the callback function 1 time for each element in the array. So instead of us doing a for loop and then doing the sums, we use the reduce. And then this is the accumulator, and this is the file, right? Which is the current file that we are processing. And then we are gonna add to the accumulator, the additions, and then we're gonna do a summation over here, file.additions. So the accumulator is the variable that's gonna be persisted across different iterations, and then the file is basically the file at each iteration, right? So at each time we go through the array, we're gonna fetch the additions per file, then we're gonna add them to the additions, right, of the accumulator. Think of the accumulator as if it's the diff data. And then each time, first iteration is going to be 1, second iteration is going to be maybe 1 plus whatever number it is. So let's say 5, it will be total is 6. And then maybe in the next iteration, we will not have any additions, but we will have 3 deletions, so on and so forth. And this is how the reduce function would work. And this is how it's going to accumulate our changes. So instead of us doing the for loop and a lot of stuff, this is a nice way of doing it. So we're going to do the same for deletions. And finally, the same for changes, right? Oops, we forgot the equal over here. We don't need syntax issues. And then when everything is done, we're going to return the accumulator, and we're going to store the accumulator and results in the diff data, right? This is, sorry, we're going to pass the diff data over here as a starting point, not store, because this is how we are storing them. This is where we're passing the initial state. So this is the calculation of all of the changes. Now the last step is for us to identify the extensions. We can skip this part, we can add it, it's up to you. For, you know, well, let me show you actually how you can add the labels. It's pretty simple. So add the labels based on the file extensions. The way for us to do this here, we can also, I'm gonna show you another way to loop over the files. We can definitely use the reduce, or map in this case, not reduce, to achieve this, but let's do it via a loop, so that we can give you some, you know, different ways of achieving the same thing. So now we are looping over the change files. Again, the change files is coming from here, right? And then we are storing each item of the array inside file as a variable. And then we want to determine the file extension. Did I write this correctly? Extension. Yeah, that's correct. And we can pull that extension from file.file name.split dot. Oh, my bad. Sorry. It's like I'm using this keyboard for the first time. Anyway, we're gonna split the file name. Why? Because the file name comes in the form of let's say readme.md, right? So this is how it looks like. And when we do the split, basically we will have an array where the first part will be readme and then the second part will be md, right? And then what we're saying is give me when we pop it, it will basically return md only as a string, obviously, right? And then what we want to do here is we want to do a switch. Or let me do this. Let's define a variable called label. Let's make it empty first. And then let's do the switch. Switch on the file extension. And then let's provide the cases. So first case is md, obviously. And then we can make the label equals markdown, right? Because you want to provide the full name. And then the second case could be, I don't know, JS. Then we say the label is JavaScript. And then maybe a YAML file. I don't know. Just improvising here. And then we call this YAML. And then, yeah, you can provide a default. It doesn't really matter. That's fine. We can provide another case for YAML, which is in the form of case YAML. We also name it YAML. Maybe for files that don't have an extension, it could be empty. Yeah, that could be a case. So let's say no extension. Okay, yeah, should be okay. This should be cool. I think it should work fine. Now that we have done the switch on the file extensions and we have defined the label, the next thing we want to do is we want to call the API that allows us to add labels to an issue or a pull request. And we can go back to the Octokit library, and the method is called add labels. And issues and pull requests are pretty much the same when it comes to the GitHub API. So this is the proper method that we're gonna call. And you can see here it takes the owner, repo, issue number, which is PR number as well. It's fine. And then we specify the label. We can provide multiple labels as an array, right? So let's actually do that over here. And as usual, await. I don't care about the response of this. Maybe it would be good to check whether the response is failed or succeeded. But yeah, I'm pretty sure you can do that on your own. For now, I'm just gonna, add the labels, and I'm not gonna really worry about the response of this call. So again, owner, repo, and then issue number. And here we're gonna provide the PR number, right? Because it's the pull request number. And then labels, we are gonna provide an array. And then we're gonna add the label over here. It doesn't matter if this is called multiple times, that's okay. Every time we have a label that we wanna add to the PR, this is how it's gonna be done. This should work just fine. And I think this is about it. Oh, yeah, sorry. We missed one more call, which is to create the comment on the issue. Let us add it over here, because the comment is for, adding the this stuff that we calculated. So we can do that with await octokit.rest.issues.create comment. And this function takes, again, owner, repo, issue number. This is the same, you know, issues and pull requests are pretty much the same. And then the body should look as follows. We use the backticks because we want to write a multi-line comment. And then we say pull request. And then we provide the PR number. PR number over here has been updated with, then we do a carriage, sorry, not carriage, we return to a new line, and then we provide the data, right? So diff changes, or was it diff changes? Diff data. Diff data dot changes. We can start with changes, doesn't matter what order, and then we can do the following. Additions, and then deletions. Right, what I've done here is I clicked on the first one and then I pressed Alt on Mac. I don't know what the option is on Windows. And then I double clicked on another word, and this will allow me to have multi-cursors. And this is what I've done. So I think this payload should work okay. And I think we are done. Let's see what's going on here. Why is it complaining? Expected. What are you expecting? What are you expecting? Yes, lint. This? Why do you want this? No. Maybe default without anything? Okay, cool. Fine. Fine. That's good. It's nice to have linters, right? All right. Cool. Let's leave the catch error over here as is, and then whenever we have an exception thrown, it will basically be outputted into our runtime. And I think we are good to go to run our tests. So the run function, we are again collecting the inputs. This is where we create an instance of the Octokit library, and we provide the token for authentication. And then we call the first API call over here to get the list of files in that pull request. And then we calculate the number of additions, deletions, and changes over here. And then we create the comment where we, state these changes in the pull request body. And then we loop over the changed files. We identify the file extensions, and then we add the appropriate labels based on the changes that we have pushed. And then we add the labels over here. Let's just make sure that this is all part of the loop. Yeah, this looks good. And then we have the catch exception over here. All right, this looks great. The next step we're gonna be doing is we're gonna say npm run all. Why? Because we wanna run the linter, we wanna build, and we wanna do all of this stuff together. We have an error, file extension. All right, let's see what the linter is complaining about. So cool, this is nice. File extension is assigned but never used. What are you talking about? Okay, that's good. I have a typo over here. That's nice. Thank you very much. Yes, lint. All right, next, what do we have? Expected a break statement before case. Okay, so it wants a break. Okay, yes, I forget sometimes. Sorry, I work with many languages throughout the day that I forget some of the basics. So we don't want to, go over the different stuff. Okay, that's fine. Let's run the linter one more time. That's why we have a linter. All right, this looks good. We have compiled the distribution. That's perfect. Yes is not available. That's cool. Let's modify the scripts over here and remove this run test. Let's take this off. Prepare. All right, this looks good. Now, for sanity's sake, let's run it one more time. npm run all. Before we push these changes. Okay, looks great. So let us push these changes. Add logic. Whatever, sorry, your commit messages should be better than this, but yeah, I just want to move a little bit faster. Is there anything that I have missed? Yes, maybe the workflows. Do we have a test workflow? Let us actually check this. So the check distribution, there's not much to do over here. Let us keep it as is. I think this is fine. But instead of node 12, I probably want to run node version 16. And let me check if setup node, what is the latest version of this one? 1 second. So again, let's go there, GitHub, paste this, and let us check the releases. Oh, there's version 3.0. All right, update with node 16. Yes, pretty much this is what we want. So let us change this to version 3. And let's change this one to 16.x. Install dependencies, npm run prepare. This should all work fine without any problems. Upload artifact version 2. Yeah, probably I'm going to skip this step. I don't care. I just want to check. I don't want it to upload anything because I'm not going to download it, obviously. I can just run it again, right? And then the test over here. Yes, this is cool. So I'm going to remove this step because I don't want to run it whenever I push to the main branch or whatever. I just want to run it whenever I create a new pull request. I don't want it on all of the events because there are many events. So I want it on whenever I open a pull request, whenever I really open a pull request, and whenever I synchronize it, which means whenever I push new changes to the pull request branch. Unit test, do I need this? No, because I don't have any unit tests. So, and let's remove this comment. So Ubuntu latest, we check out the action, that's fine. And now with. What do I need to provide over here? I need to provide basically the owner repo PR number. I already have a workflow that I have created for this sample. So I'm just going to paste this stuff over here. And you can see I'm pulling the repository owner from the GitHub environment variable or the GitHub context, basically. And then I'm pulling the repository name from github.event.repository. And then I'm pulling the PR number like this. And finally, the GitHub token from the secrets. Right, and this should be good to go. Let's commit these changes, add test workflows, and yeah, I think we are ready to test this baby. So, okay, I think we can do a good git push. So let us do that. Push changes, and you can see over here what's happening. Sorry, I think the synchronization is done. Let us go to our repository very quickly and let's check what has happened. Let's refresh the page over here. I have pull requests that have been probably... Oh, this is Dependabot. Okay, fine. Nice. Thank you very much, Dependabot. It's making sure our work is secure. Let us check if the workflows are running. Yes, this is it. It's now checking the distribution. That's perfect. And we have the unit tests workflow. So instead of doing the changes and pushing the pull request, let's create a new branch. So git switch-c. Update readme. Okay, this is a new branch. We switched to it. Now let us really update readme. Really awesome action. Very horrible readme, but yeah, it's okay. Let's commit this file. Fix readme one more time. And then let us push this new branch to our origin. And then we can use ghbr create. This is the awesomeness of the GHCLI tool. We're going to keep the title as is. I'm not going to bother with the body right now. And we can just click on this one to jump to the PR right away. That's awesome. You can see here the unit tests are running, which is basically running our custom action. And if I jump to the Actions tab, you will see that I have the workflow that has failed. All right, let's see what has happened. So cannot read properties of undefined. So I think this is the error. It's pulls, not pull. So let us do one more time everything that we did before. npm run all. Don't forget this step. It's very important, right? Okay, cool. Git add. I'm going to do it here. Fix workflows. Git push origin main. Fantastic. Now we can jump back to the PR or git checkout. Was it update? Readme, right? And we can introduce another change. And this is how we can test this one more time. Yeah, crazy, I know. But git add, git commit, fix readme, git push origin, update readme, and this time the workflow should be triggered again. Why? Because it's supposed to run every time we push new changes. So this is the new commit, and you can see here that the checks have restarted, which is great. That's exactly what we want. Now we are gonna go and make sure that everything is running smoothly. Let's go to tests. Test failed again. What's the issue now? Create comment is not a function. Okay, let's double check. And finally, we have our workflow running as it should be. I really apologize for this, but this is part of the stuff that you're probably gonna encounter in real life, right? So all I'm doing here is I'm just sharing my screen and showing you real life examples of how everything goes. So our action now is working as it's supposed to be. You can see here we have the comment that includes the changes, the additions, and the deletions. We have done a lot of changes, especially every time I'm adding a little bit to the file and removing a little bit of content. And you can check over here in the actions that all of the steps ran correctly. And there's really not much output for this step, which should be okay. And yeah, it's now working and functioning as it's supposed to be with the version. What were the problems? Well, the issues were on the level of the REST API method names. So first of all, I said here add label. It should be add labels. And the second one is create comment. Comment should be with a capital C. And also list files should have been... Sorry, pool. It was pool over here, and it actually should be pools. So if you are following along, make sure you introduce these changes as well. And don't forget to run npm run all and push the distribution. Now that you have a functioning version of this action, we can tag it. So we can say git tag, and we can say this is version 1, and then we can do a git push origin tags, right? And this will allow us to have the tag inside over here. And if we go to our tags, we can now create a release from the tag. So I can come here and say create release, choose a tag version 1, and then we can call this also version 1.0.0. Basic functionality implemented. Right, this is the other release notes. Obviously yours should be more better than this, but this is just an example. And now we have our action fully ready for anyone to use anywhere. Obviously, publishing to the marketplace is very easy. When we created this release, we could have pressed this button over here to push this also to the marketplace. But because this is not a very well-refined, action, and I don't think anyone will actually be using it, I'm not gonna push it to the marketplace and pollute it right now. But feel free to push yours to the marketplace if you feel that it's good enough. And this is it for creating JavaScript actions. Now for the second half, I promised you to show you how you can create Docker actions. And honestly, we've done all the hard work when we created the JavaScript action. And I covered all of the essentials for you to be able to learn how to use Docker to create your own actions. So also the GitHub Actions team has provided a template for that. And it's called container action inside the actions organization. And you will see here that the folder structure is a bit more basic than that. So we have our Docker file. And you should already be aware if you're going to build Docker actions what a Docker file is. And you can see here in this Docker file, we don't have much going on. We are just simply copying the README, the license, and we are copying the entry point, which is the script that's going to basically have the action runtime in it, or the logic of the action in. Obviously, the entry point could be pretty much anything else. It could be maybe a Go executable if you want to write a Go action. It could be a Python file. It could be, whatever you can think of. To create this. And then the entry point.sh, obviously it's not going to do anything over here. It's just saying hello and then taking the input, from, taking the input and just outputting it over here. And then in the action.yaml file, we are simply defining the inputs. One of them is my input. And then the runtime is going to be Docker this time. And then the image is specified as a Docker file. And then we can specify the args, right? The arguments that we're going to pass to our entry point. And in this case, we are passing the inputs.myInput. Obviously, you can have multiple inputs over here, and you can pass all of these as an array to your entry point. Now, you don't have to have the Or sorry, let me explain this way. So what happens whenever I want to call this action in my workflow? What will happen is the runner will basically try to build the Docker image from this Docker file. And then once the build is complete, it will actually run it. However, you don't always want to have your build happen on the runner itself. Sometimes you maybe want to pull the action, pull the image itself, right? You don't want to do a build. So all you need to do in this case is just to replace the Docker file with the link to the image of your action in a public Docker registry. If it's in a private Docker registry, it will not work because actions cannot authenticate to a private registry. And I'm not talking about authenticating to a private registry in the workflow. No, I'm talking about authenticating to a private registry inside the action.yaml file definition. So wherever you want to create a Docker action. This is completely different than using Docker inside a workflow. Please, let's not confuse these two, all right? So only in the scenario of Docker actions, you cannot authenticate to a private registry. So the image has to be in a public registry, and only then will the runners be able to pull it and, run the image or the Docker image and just basically do whatever the action is supposed to do. And that's it, folks. That's all I had for you today. I always start these videos thinking they're going to take like 20, 25 minutes, and probably an hour and a half later of recording, I discovered that that did not really work as expected. But I hope that these videos are actually dense in terms of content and not just lengthy. And I hope you were able to find value in them. If you have learned stuff from my content and you would like to see more of this, please like the videos, comment on them. I would love to hear from you. You can also subscribe to my channel. I do live streams almost once a week where I cover a lot of career-related topics or even technical topics and technical conversations. I also do fireside chats with a lot of different, thought leaders and CEOs, software engineers, and different established fields, established people in the industry. If you are interested in all of this, hit that subscribe button right now. You're definitely not gonna regret it. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Basim. This has been Glitch. Take care, and I will see you next time.